Thank you for the very warm welcome. And my name is Rolf, leading the supply chain consulting practice of PwC in the Netherlands. And I have to confess that this is actually my first time that I am at the delivery event. But I'm really impressed. I'm really impressed by all the smart solutions that I've seen at the stands. But I'm also actually impressed by the smart people I've seen. And one of them is actually sitting next to me, Anton. Maybe you can introduce yourself as well.
Thank you very much for your kind words. Thank you for being here, because we're very much aware this is already very late in the conference, and so a lot of people want to go home. So what we're going to do, we're going to entertain you, we're going to give you a nice insight. My personal background, I'm from Germany. I have a long career in logistics since 1986, from driver to general manager. And the last 2 years I've spent now with the MediaMarkt Saturn Group, the biggest European retailer of consumer electronics. And we are based in Ingolstadt in Germany. And we're also very much appreciating this format here and this open exchange, getting to know other retailers, interesting new suppliers. So it's very, very interesting and very good conference for us.
So thank you, Anton. And actually, Anton and myself will give you some insights on what it is of dealing with tariffs nowadays in the supply chain arena. And actually, that is quite easy because it's in the news every day. On the other hand, it is also quite difficult because the news is different every day. It's different countries, different products. The US trade policies actually change every day, and that is really hard to deal with. My colleagues in the US, I recently did an investigation amongst 600 plus supply chain executives, and the outcome of that was that 91% of them recently really considered that we really have to change the fundament of our supply chain because it's not feasible anymore to deal with these kind of uncertainty in our supply chains. And actually, this was the US perspective, but also companies that do not have a direct link with the US are even impacted because the uncertainty around the trade policies in the US. And actually, you are a nice example of that, Anton. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only what is happening in the US, but supply chains generally are very much under pressure. This US market is not really fully smashing us because we are not operating in the US. We're not selling in the US. We have a lot of suppliers, also countries where we produce for our own brands that are a little bit, or that are obviously affected. But it's not a sort of effect that hits us directly. It more or less hits us through the suppliers we have, because they will, of course, be affected. The problem being is not necessarily the tariffs. The problem is more, to my understanding, that it changes within 5 minutes. Some person says, well, we changed this, we changed the tariffs, and the next day they take it back. The next day they implement them again. The next day they take it back. So it's this uncertainty which is causing real headaches. So what do you do as a normal supply chain supplier? You, of course, have to build a buffer. You can't go in and always give the best rate. You always have to build a buffer because you have to take into account that it might change again. So at the end of the day, these people, they don't go to the market and to big retailers like us and they say, hey, we're going to increase the rates, but you are not affected, so you're not going to be object of these increases. They, of course, go to all their customers. And so it does affect us, but it not sort of in a direct way. It sort of affects us on a sort of second layer, which is, of course, just as bad, because we have to take it into our calculations, and it's also affecting our supply chain solutions.
Yeah, actually, and because of the uncertainty, it's really hard to plan for that. And really, from our point of view, is that uncertainty new? Actually not, because we have seen that the last couple of years as an upcoming pattern, actually. What you see here on the background is our supply chain monitor. That gives a kind of a flavor of the state of the European supply chain. And we do that by monitoring a couple of key supply chain indicators like freight volumes, port congestion, container prices. And basically what you see in our view is that there is no stability at all in the last couple of years. And we have seen the examples of disruptions that we have seen that make that cause that uncertainty. Some of those disruptions are really direct, like we have seen with the Ever Given that got stuck in the Suez Canal. We have seen COVID. We have seen the Red Sea conflict. We have seen the Panama Canal. But we have also seen some indirect disruptions. For example, labor shortages, changing demand in the markets, but also disruptive events like a shift in the competitive arena that also brings a lot of uncertainty to companies, businesses, but for most all, of course, also to supply chain. And I think in the pre-discussions, we also discussed the situation of your company, and you actually also had to deal with such a shift in that competitive landscape.
Yes. And it's not only, I mean, if you look at all the changes that there are in supply chains, I mean, you're talking about these disruptions. The disruptions, of course, with globalization, they have become more visible to us now in our micro surrounding that we're in, and quite suddenly we now realize in this world that's become much more easier to monitor, we have realized that a ship in the Suez Canal, which maybe 10 years ago was just a small sideline in a newspaper, has now got a big impact on our economy and on our daily business. And those are things that are really, that have made things to understood for normal consumers and for normal people doing business, that this is of course a problem. But not only that, we're talking about big trends that are changing the entire scope of a supply chain. For instance, thinking about sustainable topics, thinking about robotics, automation moving forward. Artificial intelligence now is of course pushing more and more into our daily life. So there is a lot of things that are affecting the supply chain, and there of course you have to start moving. You have to start changing your scope.
Exactly, and then, being a supply chain consultant, the questions to me is always, and what can we do about it, about that uncertainty, etc. And basically, to be very honest, we also don't have always the answers. Just be prepared for the uncertainty. I think that's the proper answer on that. And of course, the tariffs discussion is clearly another disruptions that we have to deal with in the supply chain arena. And basically, what you could see is there are two kinds of responses towards that uncertainty. Is if something suddenly happens, of course, you need to manage your crisis, basically. You have to see, okay, how does it affect me? Can I reroute certain supply flows? Do I have to look for alternative markets, alternative sources in the short term to keep your supply chain ongoing? But I think the real managing of the crisis and the uncertainty sits in the basic fundament of your supply chain. How are you going to deal with that? It's about your supply chain strategy. It's about your supply chain network. How do you put your, where are your suppliers sitting? Where are your warehousing sitting? Your factories. And it's also about the use of technology. And you mentioned that already as an indicator. And that is really fundamental. And it was really great that Alexander also mentioned just in the speech before us, he mentioned, hey, it's also a matter of choosing between being robust and resilient. And that is really an important trade-off. And that can change over time. So every time a disruption occurs, it's really useful for any supply chain executive to not only look at the immediate side of managing this crisis, but also what does it mean for my supply chain fundament. And I think you also had a really nice example of changing your supply chain fundament because of a disruptive event. And
yeah. So what I mean, if you look at MediaMarkt Saturn, they are 98% of the German population knows Media Saturn. So we are one of the best known brands there is in the market. Also operating in 11 countries, this has always made us a very, very well known and very well established company in the market. And we have still today, we have omnichannel, obviously. So we still today have 450 brick and mortar outlets. What happened in the early 2000s, quite suddenly, e-commerce players overtook us. Because with our structure, we had very, very decentralized structures. And we had basically in every one of our market, we had a full own company sitting there with an own logistical concept, with an own management, with an own sales, marketing, an entire company, you know. So nowadays it took us a few years to sort of very carefully manage that and go into a different direction. So we really had to change our supply chain to now not operate locally from 450 places anymore, but go into local, regional hubs to sort of make sure that you still have a very regional and a local service for the customer, because that's what they're looking for and that's what makes you individual. But on the other hand, also make it more cost effective, make it more resilient, make it more efficient, effective and efficient actually, so that you stay close to the customer, and on the other hand, but you can also save a lot of money on making it in a sort of duplicatable, in a system where you duplicate one system of the other, and that you can really make a difference and really have the cost leadership there, and make sure that you still keep your supply chain as close to the customer as possible, because that's at the end of the day what counts. If you don't, in our business, if you don't stay close to the customer, if you don't understand what the customer needs, if you don't upsell, if you don't give service to the customer, if you don't give him the feeling he comes out of your store and he says, hey, I really enjoyed that. I actually wanted to go in there to buy a monitor, and now I didn't only buy a monitor, I also bought another laptop, and I bought another cable, and I bought, I don't know, some sunglasses, and I go out and I spend 600 euros instead of 200, but there was somebody who looked after me, who took care of me, and I would have had to go out and buy these other things anyway. So he also saved me time and he saved me energy, and I have an insurance. If this device blows up, I can go back to them and they will take care of it. So it's not only in the supply chain, in our value chain, to just sell something. Our supply chain gives the customer the feeling, or not only the feeling, but it really takes care of him personally and makes sure they are not only left there buying one device, and then on the internet, online, alone at home, it says, the last customer also bought this and the last customer also bought that. No, we have somebody to talk to you, to listen to you, to understand what you need the device for, and then he says, hey, maybe I have another different idea for you. And that's what counts these days. Service, making a difference by taking care, listening and taking care of your customer. And that is what we can do, I think, a lot better than any online company. And that's why we're so successful these days.
Nice, and that's really a nice example, because it's really about, in this side, it's about balancing the service side of it, being close to the customer, but also being conscious of the cost. And that also determines your robustness of your supply chain, basically. And that's an interesting trade-off, and you cannot make that call overnight, of course. But we also importantly and increasingly see, and I think that's all over the place nowadays, is the use of technology. And technology, especially in times of uncertainty, the tariffs, etc., it can be used in various ways. And we have seen, of course, a lot of talk about AI, but we have already seen some practical use cases around that. By combining various data sources, you can already look forward at what is actually happening. Look at the water levels in the Panama Canal. You can already predict whether we would have a crisis over there. But also, what is very important, and that you can simulate your supply chain. If you need to make choices, you can already simulate through scenario planning, for example, the consequences of choices, and that will help you in actually to make those fundamental choices in the supply chain and the trade-offs associated with that. Not sure. How do you deal with technology in the setup of your supply chain, Anton?
We are a tech company. So we are very careful of making sure that we always have the highest technical level wherever we're operational, because that's also what we sell. We can't sell you a technical device and not know what that's there for, what's the newest developments. So we are very, very careful about making sure that we don't only sell technology, but we also use technology to achieve excellence.
Exactly. And maybe so, I think it's also for us time to wrap up a bit. Mm-hmm. I think what our story wants to tell you is that there is a lot of uncertainty, and tariffs is one of them, and it's absolutely not new. We have to learn to deal with that, and we can do that either by making sure that we can respond quickly to changing situation into the supply chain arena, but also to really think of the fundament of our supply chain in terms of the strategy, the network, but also the technology. And I think we were instructed that there was actually no time for questions anymore. But if you really have any questions after this session, feel free to approach us afterwards. And otherwise, I would really like to thank you for the attention for our discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you.